I was actually a kid when I was first put on antidepressants. I was 15. My father had suddenly passed away. My mom and I went from being a little team of 3 to 2. Because I was having suicidal ideation, I was literally thinking about jumping and calculating the time it would take to fall. It never occurred to me that this was scary. And that's when just the thought came in that I had spent half my life, in my entire adult life, medicated, and that I hadn't had a single unmedicated moment. And that's the moment I realized that these drugs, they had completely affected everything as simple as my senses. And I kind of remember saying to myself, this is cool, and also, oh no.
Hey everyone, welcome to the New Age Sage podcast. Today's guest is Brooke Siem. She is a speaker, author, and award-winning chef who did win Chopped. Chopped was my favorite show as a kid, so that's like a good thing to have in your resume. So, you're here because of your experience with antidepressants and pharmaceuticals, and that's personally my story to what awakened me. So, very excited for what's to come. But to begin with, I just want to hear the story from square one. First, begin with what got you onto them, why you decided to take them.
Okay.
And then take me into the journey.
Sure.
The journey of misery.
The journey of misery. So I was actually a kid. I was a teenager when I was first put on antidepressants. I was 15. It was 2001. My father had suddenly passed away, and I was an only child. So my mom and I went from being a little team of 3 to 2, and it was recommended that I go get some therapy, which, seemed like the right call at the time. And so I went to go see a child psychologist, and she and I we were not a good match from the very beginning. And again, this was 2001. We really weren't having the same conversations about counseling or therapy that we are now. And so I didn't really want to go. I was kind of dragged there a little bit. And this psychologist broke my trust very early on. And so I was stubborn, and I was just said, I'm not going to talk to you, basically, no. And so one day she called my mom and said, you're wasting your time with therapy. What this kid needs is medication. I'm diagnosing an anxiety and depressive disorder and recommending medication. And so, here's my mom. She's grieving. She talked to the other adults in my life and her friends, some of whom were psychologists themselves. And they said, yeah, this sounds like the right call. And so I got taken to a child psychiatrist, and that's when the train of medications started. And it was a pretty classic story. I was a teenager. We tried 2 drugs before we landed on the combination that I ended up on. For whatever reason, those 2 drugs, I had immediate obvious side effects. And in the end, we ended up on Wellbutrin and Effexor, 2 drugs that are not approved for use in children and teens even today. And then I stayed on that combination of drugs for the next 15 years. And also multiple other drugs were added in to counter the side effects that the antidepressants had created. So it wasn't until I was 30 that it dawned on me that I'd spent half my life, my entire adult life, on antidepressants.
When you were 30, what sparked the interest in getting off them?
So I think when anyone turns 30, that's kind of maybe the first minor existential crisis you have, because you start to really feel like an adult and your 20s are gone.
I got 5 years to go. I'm not looking forward to it.
Enjoy them.
Yeah, okay.
So I think for me, it wasn't just about turning 30, but my dad died when I was 15. So there was this awareness that I was about to head into a part of my life where I would have had more time without him than I actually had with him. And that just kind of screwed me up a little bit, thinking about that. And then also that by that logic, it meant I would have spent more than half my life on antidepressants, and I hadn't had a single unmedicated moment as an adult. And here's the thing, if I had been doing well, then maybe it wouldn't have dawned on me that I should change something. But I was not doing well. I was having suicidal ideation. I was just absolutely miserable. I was more depressed than I had ever been in my entire life. And so by my logic, these drugs clearly aren't working. I shouldn't be this depressed on this many antidepressants.
Yeah. In that time, how did it stunt your emotional development? Like, did you?
Oh boy.
Did you have to figure out how to feel? What was that like? Did you realize? Did you ever grieve because you were, numbed out? How did that process go?
I think if I look at it in retrospect, at the time, I would have said that I was fine, that I was functioning, that I called myself a realist. My mantra was basically life sucks and then you die. And
Nice.
Yeah, right. And I just thought that that's who I was. I was deeply sarcastic. I was drawn to darker things. And I just assumed that that's who I was. But when I was medicated, I was right in the middle of puberty. So every single thing I had developed about myself as an adult human, I had done through the lens of powerful psychiatric drugs. So I really didn't know, and it even had never dawned on me, what was me and what wasn't me. I thought that my brain and body had sort of matured into exactly what I was supposed to be. It didn't occur to me that it was being affected by the perception that I saw the world with because of these drugs, right? So at the time, I would have said I was, a perfectly responsible, mature 30-year-old. In retrospect, having gone through antidepressant withdrawal and now being 7 years out of it and actually having faced everything that came after, I realized that there was a lot of my personality and aspects of how I interacted with the world that was very stunted. That was very much like a 15-year-old. I certainly had not grieved fully the death of my father or many other people and things that had happened in the 15 years that I was medicated. I had no idea who I actually was because everything about my personality changed so radically when I started going through withdrawal and getting off the drugs. And that all just blew my mind because no one had ever told me that that was a possibility. I didn't understand how these drugs had such a full systematic effect and how they had affected my perception of the world. I didn't understand that until I got off of them.
Mm-hmm. Who was the person that the pills were hiding?
Well, I think a much better person.
Yeah.
Kind of like a happy, giggly person who's actually happy to be alive, which I didn't want a future when I was medicated. So, I think the most obvious mark to me is kind of sarcasm. I considered myself a very sarcastic person. And I thought that was funny and that sarcastic humor was funny. And in retrospect, I understand now that that was completely just a coping mechanism. It was a way to push people away. It was kind of a way to brush off how truly horrible I felt about myself and just being alive. And now it's like I hear sarcasm in the world. I see it. And to me, it's almost a red flag of, oh, something's going on with that person. They're not as lighthearted and happy as maybe they seem. And, maybe I'm projecting, but that's exactly how it was for me. And, that's not really part of who I am anymore.
Yeah. And what age, just to unpack the journey a little bit, what age did you kind of become conscious that these things were not working? That part of you realized, escape the matrix of your brain of, whoa, this is not working. And then I want to take the journey from there, that moment, to then actually getting off the pills and then the actual experience of the withdrawal.
It was fast. I was literally, so I lived on the 30th floor of the Manhattan apartment on 3rd Avenue. And
3rd Avenue and what?
38th and 3rd.
Okay. I went to school on 16th and 3rd.
Oh yeah. Down there. I know that area. But so I had this habit. I had pushed the screen out of my window, and because I was having suicidal ideation, I was literally thinking about jumping and calculating the time it would take to fall. And this was like a regular thing for me. And I mean, it never occurred to me that this was scary or that I should call the suicide helpline or any of that, because I didn't have any fear of it. Because one, I just had no real fear response at all because I was so numbed out. And also, as I said, I didn't want a future. So there was nothing scary about it to me. But what did dawn on me one day, it was around the time of my 30th birthday, and I was kind of hanging out at my window thinking about all this. And that's when just the thought came in that I had spent half my life in my entire adult life medicated, and that I hadn't had a single unmedicated moment. So it was almost like, could there would I have thought differently if I wasn't on these drugs? It was just a little thought that entered my head. And right around the same time, I got this completely out of the blue, bizarre opportunity to travel around the world for a year. It was basically kind of like a little lottery that I won. And I kind of said, well, I can't ignore this. That's just an opportunity out of left field. And so I saw a psychiatrist and I told her what was going on. And this was all within about a month. And she did not recommend that I get off the drugs. She was not supportive of it. But I kind of told her, look, I physically cannot take this amount of drugs with me in a suitcase for a year. Because at that time I was on 6 drugs. And so I said, I can't fill my suitcase with this stuff. There are countries we're going to where you're not allowed to take some of these psychiatric drugs into the country. And I certainly can't rely on getting a refill in some of the places we were going to be, because we were not going to be in Paris and London and, places where I would trust it. We were going to be in the middle of nowhere on some island, in Southeast Asia. So it just was not going to work. And what I figured at the time was that if this was about 6 months before I was supposed to leave, I thought if I just get off these drugs that I'm on now, we'll figure out my baseline. There's probably been some new development in, psychopharmacology in the past 15 years. I'll just get on a new drug and I'll be on one and we'll go on. But that's not what happened. Instead, I just went into such severe antidepressant withdrawal so quickly that it completely changed
in the moment you're just like, I'm off them. Once you realized you couldn't take them traveling, you just said, I'm out.
It just didn't seem logical.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I said, but the plan was to figure out my baseline, because my psychiatrist had told me, well, you might feel like you have the flu for a few days, but there was no warning about withdrawal. There was nothing that would have predicted that I was about to spend a year in physical and psychological hell because of this. And so I just thought this was going to be as simple as like, stop taking Advil or something. And so I just didn't think it was a big deal or that there would be a timing problem.
A year?
I was in a severe withdrawal for about a year.
Okay. What was that like?
It was the worst. So this was 2016 when I
never heard of a year. Mine lasted about a month, but I wasn't on it for 15 years. So
yeah,
a year is wild to me. And I'm not saying it's not true, but just like, whoa, that can be a possibility.
Yeah, it's a possibility. And the research on antidepressant withdrawal is we're getting a lot more of it now. It's really picked up in the past couple of years, which thank God. But at the time when this happened to me, it was 2016. So the first time antidepressant withdrawal had been mentioned in the research literature was 2015, roughly, in a pretty formal way. And so there wasn't a lot of information about it. There was some forums online from some people who'd experienced similar things. And so, for me, my psychiatrist, what had happened is I was on 37.5 milligrams of Effexor XR, which is the lowest dose available on the market. So you can't go get 20 grams or whatever easily from your local CVS. So she just said, I can't prescribe you a lower dose. Just stop. Good luck. Basically, I think she actually used the words good luck. And again, I wasn't thinking that this was some sort of life-changing event here, so I just did what she said. I stopped taking it, and I knew from experience that if I missed a dose, because in the past, if I'd just forgotten or maybe there was a holiday and I couldn't get a refill, I'd start to feel kind of weird. I'd get a little shaky, my heart would pound, I'd feel like I had 10 cups of coffee suddenly, and I just was out of sorts. And so I figured I could handle that because I'd been there before. But what happened when I stopped taking the Effexor is it kept getting worse and worse. So I had the shaky feeling, the cup of coffee feeling. Then I would kind of feel nauseous and hot and cold for a few days. But the moment everything really started to go wonky was about 6 days in. And this was the moment when I realized that these drugs had been affecting my entire system and not just my emotions. Because I was standing on about 35th or 36th Street and Park Avenue, which is kind of right by Grand Central. So they have the 2 lanes going this way, and there's kind of a promenade with some lights and greenery in the middle. And it was, late March or something. So it was kind of early spring. And I remember I was wearing short sleeves for the first time since the winter. And it was roughly dusk. And so it was the time when all the cars were just turning on their headlights. And I was walking to or from somewhere. And all of a sudden, it was the strangest thing. I just looked up and there was one of those big, tall, kind of snake-like lamps that turned on. And I looked at it, and all of a sudden I saw the light bulb. And I just remember staring at this thing and saying to myself, why can I see the light bulb? Because I've lived here for 7 years. Up until now, I've only ever looked at them and noticed the light itself, like the glow of light. But I could see the light bulb in the coils. And I just kind of said, that's odd that I'm noticing this. And then I kind of looked down, and it was like a movie. Everything was in slow motion. And I looked at the cars coming towards me. And their headlights went from kind of fuzzy orbs. All of a sudden, they all went into these really sharp stars. And again, I'm just like, oh, this is weird. And then also at the same time, it started to rain and people started to open umbrellas. And it was like I could hear this orchestra of umbrellas whooshing open around me. And it was just kind of, it was this presence. It was like someone had ripped cellophane off my body and all of my senses. And then it started to rain. And when I really knew that something big was about to happen was that when the rain was hitting my skin, it hurt. It felt kind of like BB guns hitting my skin, and I could feel each individual drop. And I was literally standing there listening and looking and feeling the rain. And that's when the moment I realized that these drugs they had completely affected everything as simple as my senses. And I kind of remember saying to myself, this is cool, and also, oh no. I just kind of intuitively knew something was coming. And within a few days after that is when the real psychological symptoms started hitting for withdrawal. And those were, huge mood swings, going from extreme rage to laughing, really violent, intrusive thoughts of hurting myself and other people, just a complete inability to go outside because the sound was so overwhelming, the noise sensitivity. My skin, I started developing something called nodular vasculitis. So I got all these bumps under my skin and these bruises, and it's an autoimmune response to extreme stress in the system. I stopped sleeping, GI issues. Basically, I went from being a functioning human to a non-functioning human. And I didn't know what was happening to me. And I thought I was legitimately going crazy. I was not really aware of severe withdrawal at this point. And I just thought, oh, well, this is who you really are without these drugs, then you were actually a sick person, and you must need them. And that's when I started making phone calls. And luckily I ended up having a phone call with a family friend who was a psychologist who said to me, you're not crazy. This is antidepressant withdrawal. This is from a powerful drug leaving your system. And that is what made me realize what was happening. And then I just got pissed off, and I was like, well, I'm not going back on these things, and I'm going to ride this out. But I didn't know it was going to be a year.
Mm-hmm. How grateful are you that one person answered the phone, right?
I'm really grateful she answered the phone, but it really upsets me about why I had to call her specifically. Yeah. Because the thing is that I intuitively knew that if I told my psychiatrist what was happening to me, she would have put me on an involuntary psychiatric hold. Mm-hmm. She would have deemed me a risk to myself or others, and that I couldn't take care of myself, and I would have literally been pulled off into a psychiatric hospital in New York City. And then
injected with God knows what.
All because I was having a withdrawal reaction to a low dose of a common medication that I was told was safe.
Yeah.
And the reason why I called this woman as opposed to my psychiatrist was because she was in another state and she couldn't do anything. And that's really sad that there was no safe place for me to go locally and to just say what's happening to me without being committed. Mm-hmm. So I'm so grateful that she was there, that she picked up the phone, and that she gave me some framework of what was happening. But it still pisses me off that the person who should have been able to help me likely would have hurt me.
Yeah, I mean, just to relate my experience to see where there's common ground, this sparked my interest in doing all of this, just that exact thing, right? It's You know, I was dealing with shit that every 19-year-old deals with when I got put on. Right, I had my ex-girlfriend cheated on me, and I was, heartbroken like a 19-year-old would be. And I get to a psychiatrist's office, and I'm like, I'm feeling insecure, like everything's wrong in my life, like da da da. She's like, you know what, you should get on Lexapro. I was like, you know what, I probably need that because I'm so heartbroken.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know how that was a rational decision. So then
because you think it'll help you feel less shitty.
Yeah. But for her, it's like, I'm just a kid with a broken heart. Okay, Lexapro. All right.
Well, yeah.
We're good, Lexapro. And then I spent the summer on that. I kind of enjoyed it because I felt numb. Mm-hmm. But then school started, and I went to an Ivy League where I had to, do well. And I was like, I can't fucking think. Like, I can't even. I can't process information. Yeah. My brain feels dead. Yeah. And she's like, you know what? You probably have ADHD. So here's the Adderall. Yep. Took the Adderall. So you know what? I feel like I'm on cloud 9. All right. Well, the Adderall now, I can't relax at night because I'm getting anxious at night. You know what? You need Klonopin. So it's like, bang. There's some Klonopin. And it's like, I'm getting suicidal. Double a dose of Lexapro. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, once that Lexapro doubled the dose. Yep. The next 9 months I was fucked. I was just fully, like, seriously suicidal all the time. Mm-hmm. And then.
Did you think that this was you? Like that you were just depressed and that's why you needed more?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the trap, right?
That's the trap.
I was like, I'm probably just this fucked up human being that drugs can't fix.
Yep.
And then.
Because now you have 3 psychiatric diagnoses.
Yeah. And then COVID hit, and I was also smoking weed and drinking, which was just even worse.
Yeah, it just adds to it.
Because I had to self-medicate. I was like, I was going insane. I was like, this weed will help, and this fucking nice. Also, my psychiatrist would just give me these massive bottles of Klonopin, and I just pop them like candy. This doctor was bad. So COVID hit, and then I was like popping Klonopin like Skittles, and then my mom was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I was like, "You're right." So I literally just like went cold turkey on all of them, except for the Klonopin because I knew I would die. I went cold turkey on I was on 2 antidepressants and 2 ADHD medications, so I went off those, went off the Adderall, and then I thankfully found a good psychiatrist. My mom found that was like getting me off the Klonopin, but within about 2 to 3 weeks. For 2 weeks, every thought I had was to kill myself. Like every single, I couldn't even, like, it was just like a machine gun. I was laying, I was like, holy fuck. That was, once I...
You can't look at anything. You see a knife, whatever it is, car.
Yeah, I literally was like grabbing knives, putting my, it sounds morbid, it was true, putting my wrist. I was like, I thought I was done. Yep. And going through that now, for me, where I use that, it's like, honestly, nothing could faze me. I've lost a parent since then, and all these things have happened to me where it's like, this doesn't even fucking come close to what I experienced. Like, so how, was it that bad for you, the suicidal like machine gun ideation? Yeah, that was the worst part for me was the psychological assault is kind of the way I describe it. It felt to me like sort of like I had been incepted. It was just well, you had been. That's true. For me, it was triggered by faces mostly. And so when I walked out to the street of New York, which is really crowded, I would see other people's faces, and it was like I would get this nanosecond movie that somehow still showed me every single horrible thing that could happen to me or them. Very often that was my fault. Like, just the best way I can describe it is I think most people have experienced this if you're driving in a car and you just think to yourself, well, what happens if I just went off the side of the road? What if I just, and went off? And when people have that first thought, every time I use that analogy, everyone goes, yeah, it's like everyone gets that because they're driving. I don't know what it is psychologically. I think there's something about us being so in charge of our own mortality in a way that other animals really aren't. And just that awareness kind of messes with our psyche. But if you imagine that kind of feeling, only it's happening thousands of times a day, and it's worse when you're around other people. It was just that. Yeah. And it's horrible. I mean, and you literally think you are nuts and that there's something really wrong with you. But it was just coming off of this drug that I had been on for 15 years, and no one mentioned that this would be a possibility. There was no frame of reference. Yeah. And then you're scared to tell anyone because, in what world is it safe to be like, oh, I'm thinking about, really hurting a stranger I've never met. Yeah.
Can't say that.
Yeah.
Which is why I talk about it.
Yeah. I was also fully hallucinating. I believe it was more spiritual. I believe that,
we can go there too.
I fully believe the concoction and the withdrawal made me go somewhere.
Yeah.
I was seeing everything. I was seeing fucking the mentors. I was seeing things, and I'd see on people I thought were cool, and I realized they were pretty dark after the fact. So I was seeing,
interesting.
I was seeing these dementors on them, but something happened where I was just like, I had a spiritual awakening at the same time I had the withdrawal. So I was like fucking just like going insane, but then also seeing everything. Like I went past my mind in some weird way. So I had this weird spirit. I don't know if it's called. I had a spiritual awakening out of the withdrawal experience because my mind was just destroyed. I think once you
and open at the same time.
I think what I realized is that I had to lose my mind to realize I wasn't my mind. Like I had to realize this thing's insane.
Yeah.
I had to go beyond it.
Yeah.
To where spirit, consciousness to decide. But that was also my experience, which was interesting. Did you ever have any like out of body spiritual experiences from the withdrawal? Or?
Yeah. So I'm curious. When you say you were hallucinating, was it kind of like? Was it because it's hard to just explain. So was it like if you looked at a lamp? And the lamp looked like a gnome and you would have bet that it was a gnome? Or was it kind of like a veil where you could see both at the same time? Does that make sense?
I would believe I was talking to demonic spirits.
Okay.
And I would see them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But would you see the real world at the same time, or was it like the real world?
No, I'd see it both at the same time.
Both at the same time.
I'd be like sitting on the couch and I'd be like seeing these things. And they'd be speaking to me.
So what happened to me was, again, so much of it is around people's faces. It would be like, and every once in a while, this still happens to me. I'll be looking at someone's face and all of a sudden they just kind of go, I don't know if I want to use, things kind of go nuclear winter on me. Like everything just looks kind of cold and dead, and it'll happen in a flash. Okay. And when it happens now, I have to consciously pull my energy in a lighter, higher direction. And I
think that's part of reality. That's the tricky part. There is a serious part of reality that is like that. That is creating the part of reality that can have this happen.
Yes.
Going off that, you've done more research than me, I'm assuming. How common would you say this experience is? Like how many people are dealing with this kind of shit, don't even know about it?
As far as withdrawal or seeing nuclear winter / demonic in withdrawal?
Just the whole roller coaster we've been talking about with pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, it's actually quite common. So it's roughly a quarter. I mean, there's a few different statistics depending on which one we're focusing on, but a large percentage of people around the world, and especially in the United States, I think women in the United States, it's roughly 1 in 25 who are on, 1 in 4, so 25% who are on some sort of psychiatric drug. The general population is, I think, closer to 1 in 6, 1 in 7. Then we have children.
I thought it'd be way higher.
That's a lot of people. That's and that's just it might be higher now because
whenever I talk, everyone's always on something. I don't say with judgment, but most people I talk to, I'm on this, I take that.
So there's a couple of things there. You're probably getting a little bit of sample bias, just depending on the demographic of people you're talking to.
Yeah.
Also, because the U.S. doesn't have a centralized medical system, which means individual doctors aren't necessarily reporting to, a national organization how many of their patients are on drugs, we don't actually get nearly as much of an updated it's not as updated as other countries. So they will run in our country, these surveys once every 5 to 10 years. And I believe the last one that happened was in 2018. And that's the one that said that I think roughly 1 in 6, 1 in 7 adults are on some sort of psychiatric drug. That was 2018, pre-pandemic. Now there's a lot that's changed in the past 6 years from a prescribing standpoint. I mean, now that we have all these online telehealth things, people are getting thrown these drugs on TikTok. So I think it's actually a lot higher. Oh yeah, you get these, doctor influencers who will, say you might have ADHD and then the solution is here's some Adderall or whatever. It's horrible. But
and you can get prescribed it now from just texting them online, right?
Through all these BetterHelp, hymns, it's so destructive.
Yeah, I think I got prescribed Viagra once, just texting a chatbot.
It's
when I was 19.
That's ridiculous. So anyway, there's a huge percentage of people in this country on these drugs. And the literature says, the conservative literature says about 50% of people who take antidepressants will experience some sort of withdrawal. And of the people who experience withdrawal, half of them will experience severe withdrawal. So it's roughly 25% who will have some sort of severe withdrawal. But the length of time is questionable. Some people are in severe withdrawal for a month. Some people are in it for a year, and there are people I've talked to who've had multiple years.
I was severe for 2 weeks, probably in it for like 2 months. But the question I wanted to ask is, you spent a lot of time thinking about this. Is there any nuance with this? Are you fully like, there's no way anyone should be able to should be put on this stuff? And are there cases you think where people would benefit from them?
That's a really tricky question. So when it comes to children, I have a pretty hard line where I think that there's almost no situation in which it's appropriate.
Especially Adderall, Ritalin.
Yeah,
for
Adderall.
A 4-year-old.
I mean, yeah, Lexapro was just approved for use in 7-year-olds.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And the reason why I think there's almost no situation in which it's appropriate, and I guess I'll leave the door open for a crack if you're in a situation with someone really violent. Maybe there's something temporary that needs to be used, and in that case, antidepressants are probably not the right call because they're not fast acting. But a 7-year-old is the product of their environment. If a 7-year-old is having such severe issues that doctors and teachers and parents just want to throw medication at the 7-year-old, something is wrong with the 7-year-old's environment. And we need to look at the parents. We need to look at what's going on at the school. We need to actually do some hard work in order to figure out what is causing this. And I just don't buy that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain of that 7-year-old. I don't buy it. And that 7-year-old has no agency. There are few, if any, decent studies about what's happening when you put kids on these drugs. They affect emotional development. They affect physical development. And so I think it's just, there's really, and having been a medicated child, I just can't support it, especially as a first line defense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for adults, I think it's a bit of a different situation because at the end of the day, I believe adults should be able to do whatever the hell they want as long as they're not hurting anybody else. And I think that they deserve complete, full, informed consent. And so if an adult receives full informed consent, which they likely haven't, but if they are aware of the withdrawal effects that can happen, if they know that there are not any decent long-term studies about the efficacy of antidepressants, if they know that placebos regularly outperform them, if they know what the side effects are, if they know that these drugs have only been studied in the short term, and they still choose to make the choice to take them, then go for it. It's not my fight, but people don't have that information.
To even add to that, there's also the side of things that there's many, many ways to treat what's going on.
Yes.
Differently to.
Yes.
That's a lot of why I focus on my work is how can you heal yourself truly. So I think to me, if you take depression, which is the common one, in my experience of just a procrastination of doing the inner work. I didn't know how to go inside and basically clear the trauma that was fucking me up. So, and also I think with depression, it's when you become aware that you're fucked up. I think most people are unconsciously depressed. They walk through life with the same exact thoughts or things that are messing them up, but they have no idea. They're unconscious to them. I think depression to me is you're conscious that there's a better path for you, that you can do things that benefit you. You should be eating better. You should be working out. You should be doing this form of therapy or healing, but you're just not. You're just like basically stuck in this rut of, I know I should be doing better, but like, I'm not doing better. And then you take this pill and you're just good. And then you think you're good. So if you were to create an ideal world where someone was dealing with depression and they went somewhere for help, what should they be hearing from that person who's helping them?
Okay, if we're working in an ideal world, I would like to eliminate the DSM and all medical terminology to begin with. Because when you're suffering deeply, it really helps to have a name for things and a reason, because it makes you feel like either like you're not alone or that you're somehow less responsible because, oh, this thing has happened to you, right? It takes a little bit of the responsibility away. And this can be a tricky conversation because bad stuff happens to people. A lot of people have been seriously hurt. They're in horribly abusive situations. They've experienced something terrible. Their emotions that come from that are completely reasonable. And yes, it's not their fault that these things happen to them, but they are feeling it, right? And so I'm not trying to, it's not that I want to blame the individual. It's just that we have to realize that, what is it that Gabor Mate says, that it's not your fault what happened to you, but it is your responsibility for dealing with it, right? And I think when we have, a 1,000-page book that lists symptoms kind of like a menu, and you just say, oh, I got these 5, I must have this thing, with absolutely no research or biological basis to back it up, and then to throw a biological solution at it, that's causing problems. I mean, look, if these drugs were working, we wouldn't see suicide rates going up, and we wouldn't see disability rates due to mental illness going up and depression, and every kid on the block wouldn't be medicated, right? So it just based on common sense, this isn't working very well. Mm-hmm. So I would remove that from the equation, and that I think would force both counselors and the individual to start looking at what's the actual problem here, what's going on, what are we experiencing. And then furthermore, I think that there's kind of 2 camps of people. One are people who have had something pretty clear happen to them, and it's pretty easy to say, okay, well, you went through this horrible thing. Like, let's say you were, let's say you grew up in a war zone or something, just to make it really extreme. That's going to create a lot of trauma in the body. It's a pretty clear line from that happening to you to maybe the way you're feeling now. But there are a lot of people I talk to who say, nothing bad really happened to me. My parents loved me and there was no issue, and yet I still feel this way, right? That can be a lot trickier for people to address because they either they feel like their pain is unworthy because it's not as bad as somebody else's. And then there's not that thing to go focus on.
Or they're unhealthy and they don't know.
Right. And so what is that, right?
They have a deficiency in a vitamin or something.
It could be that. It could be, I think if we look at it more as a spiritual crisis, then that's a way that we can start to address it. So a lot of common therapy and talk therapy, again, it keeps people in these boxes. It's like, well, here's our definition of normal, so we're trying to get you there, when I think it needs to be the opposite. Who are you? How do we unpack that? How do we get you to address the fact that you're feeling pain because you're feeling pain even though nothing bad happened to you, right? And so I think there are a lot of different ways we can go that. Or a lot of different ways we could address that. We could, look at everything from polyvagal theory to self-compassion to there's inner family systems, there's psychedelic therapy. I mean, you have to get past people's kind of 3-dimensional consciousness and get them down to that next level to start really healing. And I don't really think the traditional paradigm does that well, which so I would just love for there to be a lot more options for people to go do things that are a little alternative to the mainstream, and to not use the word depression or anxiety to describe how they're feeling, because those are just umbrella terms that don't really get to the point.
I think what you're describing to me is it's humanizing. I think it's dehumanizing to see someone like a robot, right? Like, oh, this line of code is missing.
Yeah.
Here's a pill to fix it.
Yeah.
Right? It's more humanizing approach to say, why are you hurting? Where did this come from? And then heal that hurt.
And if you don't know, then you need more creative tools in order to start clearing whatever muck is in people, because it could be epigenetic. They could have inherited something that some sort of emotional thing that happened to their parents. It could be that they're just kind of spiritually cloudy, and it could be that they just don't have any direction, right? A lot of this stuff is nebulous, and so you can't really fix it with a checklist.
What do you think people who are benefiting from taking antidepressant, do you think they're actually benefiting, or this is a controversial side of things, do you think they're actually benefiting, or they're just placebo out to believe that they're benefiting from it?
Well, if we look at the literature, both. In most of the research, if you kind of look at kind of the broad spectrum of what's of the research that's been done, the 15% is what comes out as far as people who are getting a clinically beneficial effect from antidepressants over a placebo. That's repeated multiple times in the literature. So based on that, we could probably say that about 15% of people who are taking these drugs are having a clinically significant benefit, but that means that 85% aren't. And of that 85%, people are either just fully non-responders, so like doesn't make a difference at all. There's a chunk that are having bad responses. And then there are some who are probably having a placebo effect, because the placebo effect is very strong both in all of medicine. It's extremely strong.
Mm.
So the answer is both.
Yeah, how would that placebo effect work? They just convince themselves that they have like a chemical imbalance that's causing their depression, and this pill gives them a fix, and that's it. And they can just bypass all the trauma they haven't healed and the gut stuff. And the amount of people I see who I had friends, because I'm in this space a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll ask me for help, and they'll be like, "Hey, I'm dealing with this. Okay, what's going on? All these things in my life. What are you eating? Oh, I fucking sandwiches and fast food, and I still drink soda, and I'm drinking on the weekends, and that's not even a possibility to them as to why they're depressed. Yeah. So they take the antidepressant,
yes,
and they can keep doing these things that are fucking up their lives, and it's just justifying it in some weird way. So it makes them keep up their bad habits and justify it to themselves.
The placebo effect is really fascinating because it's not, it gets a little conscious, but it's also unconscious. It's basically just the environment that we're in and what we're told can unconsciously affect the result. And for antidepressants specifically, I would suggest people look at the work of Irving Kirsch out of Harvard, because it's fascinating. He's done a ton of work on the placebo effect in antidepressants. And so if we back it up and we don't even talk about antidepressants specifically, the research has been done on the placebo effect in the medicine with knee surgeries. They'll have people who have a knee issue, a tear somewhere. They'll give them a fully fake surgery where they cut into them and they sew them back up, but they don't actually address the tear in their knee. And these people recover and they're like, I feel great. So even something as physical as a knee injury can be influenced by the placebo effect just because they thought they got the surgery to fix their knee.
Yeah.
So when it comes to antidepressants, when these drugs are tested against a placebo, I mean, this gets really complicated because there's placebos, there's active placebos. In research studies, there's something called the blind getting broken, which means that either the researchers or the participants know whether or not they've gotten the placebo or not. And if they know, that affects the outcome. And so it can get really sticky and tricky. And so in the research where they have tested various antidepressants against an active placebo, so an active placebo is one where you're going to have some sort of physical effect, like maybe the pill has a bitter taste, or it gives you dry mouth, or it's like a slight caffeine or something just so you feel a little different. Placebos outperform often antidepressants or are just as effective, like a sugar pill, basically. And then there are other studies where if they have a placebo and it's a non-active placebo, but the drug is active, right? Then the blind gets broken. People are like, oh, well, I must not have gotten the drug because nothing happened to me. And then the study results look totally different. So it's tricky, but there's repeatable evidence against multiple antidepressants that placebos are just as effective.
There's a piece of the neuroscience that confuses me. I don't know if you have an answer to it. Is if the antidepressant serves as a placebo, how does it create chemical dependency?
Well, but the antidepressant is not a placebo.
It's not?
No.
But ends up, how so?
Okay. So
I think I understand what
you're asking.
Like, in my experience, it can have a placebo effect on people, right? It's not helping the depression, but they think it is.
Yeah.
But if it has a placebo effect, then how at the same time is it causing a chemical dependency?
Let's say an antidepressant has no effect on the depression. Mm-hmm. It's still a chemical that goes into your body and changes the chemistry of your body, even if it doesn't positively or negatively affect your mood. So then when you try and come off the drug, especially if you've been on it a while, you could still possibly enter into a withdrawal situation.
That makes sense.
Whereas a placebo, a sugar pill, is not going to affect your chemistry, and it shouldn't affect your mood, but it does because you think it does. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
I think why it didn't make sense is it's a crazy concept to me that a pill that doesn't have any effect on you can make you chemically dependent on it for like years of your life.
Well, because it does have an effect on you, but when we talk about the effect, like, does it have an effect on your mood in the way you want it to, right? So, for example, I'm not convinced that the antidepressants, when I was put on them, actually helped my depression at all. Because one, I don't know if I was grieving, and grieving and depression are close cousins. It's, so it's just hard to know. But I didn't suddenly be like, oh, the sun's out, But I did have all these other physical side effects. I was having gut issues. I started having thyroid issues. I developed something called bile reflux disease. And those were all side effects from the antidepressants, from the chemical. But I didn't realize they were connected at the time. And so I just ended up going to other specialists and getting other drugs prescribed to deal with that. It wasn't until I got off of them and everything started to change and I got off all the other drugs too that I said, oh, okay, well, this was all connected. But that's an example of how these actually had a huge effect on my body. Didn't do too much for my mood. But then I had a chemical dependency on them because I'd been on them for so long.
Does
that make sense?
I got it. Yeah. I want to kind of switch gears to not a conspiratorial approach, but more of, I'm curious, your perspective, I'm sure you've investigated it, is why is the system set up the way it's set up, right? Like why in the US are we dealing with this to like the extreme? Why is there still so much resistance in the medical field to accepting this truth? How much of it is, brainwashing by big pharma?
Yeah.
How much of it is just egoistic doctors not seeing alternative route? What do you think is actually creating this bureaucracy, the system of basically killing us with antidepressants and prescribing medication and not healing? What have you found the answer is to why that is happening?
There's definitely no one answer. There's multiple influences that are kind of converging at the same time. And if we go way back, you can even start in about World War II, where this started. And I still don't know. I've spent so much time researching this and I do so much work on it, and I still don't know where the line is between Pandora's box, this got out of hand, and active conspiracy. And I don't even know if conspiracy is the right word, but it's kind of like, are there bad actors in this sphere that are trying to get people hooked? Or has the system just kind of built on top of itself in a way where it's what's called a wicked problem? And a wicked problem is a problem that is so ingrained that there's no clear solution, because if you try and fix one end, you have a problem with the other. It's so systematic at this point. So if we go way back into World War II, well, the first major, psychiatric drugs, the first major tranquilizers and mood stabilizers and whatnot all appeared because we were in an environment of quick fixes and magic pills. Like we had just, we had discovered antibiotics. There was all these technological achievements that had been created between World War I and World War II. And so the kind of cultural moment was, let's solve these problems. And so they were looking for compounds that could solve problems. And they stumbled across a few that were used in psych wards and tuberculosis wards, and they made people either elated or tranquilized. And we basically have our first they were called major tranquilizers at the time. And so it kind of started there. And then, there was also a change around the same time where, prior to some changes being made within legal laws, like in the government, medicines were tonics, they were syrups, they could be sold by individuals. And then there was a change made that said, okay, prescription medications can only be made through a doctor. So suddenly doctors were the gatekeepers. This all happened kind of at the same time. And then pharmaceutical companies who were creating these stimulants in the 60s and 70s were doing a lot of advertisement, and they were advertising a lot at women who, couldn't handle the household. And so then we kind of started going down that path where we're taking a pill to solve the ills of society. And then the money factor starts to come in, and then the insurance factor starts to come in, and then Prozac comes onto the market in the late 80s, and the tagline is better than well. And there's just been enough that's layered on top where by the time we get to where we're at now, it's kind of like, how do you can't pull one string to unravel the whole thing, because insurance needs a code to bill. So you cannot bill sunshine, exercise, spiritual and emotional fulfillment, and having all your basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs met. You can't bill for that and get paid. In order to get reimbursed as a doctor, you have to have a code. The codes are depression, anxiety, bipolar, cancer, whatever it is, right? So there's that. And then, well, the only way an insurance will bill for that is if they follow standard of care, which right now standard of care is a pill. Mm-hmm. So if you don't follow that, you can't get billed, and you might run the risk of getting sued. Okay, well then, so there's that. Then we got to go to pharmaceutical companies are the ones giving most of doctors their information. So if a doctor learns in a textbook or a medical school or a conference about some new drug, it's because the pharmaceutical company is the one teaching them. That's a conflict of interest, right? Because they're getting all of this information. There's so much information that they have to manage these days. The pharmaceutical company is telling them that, oh, we've created this new illness, and here's the drug for it. Here's the checklist for it. Go. Then psych drugs, most of them are not regulated. They're not, it's not like trying to prescribe an opioid or something where they have strict regulations. So a GP can just give a 7-year-old Lexapro.
Why do you think there's no regulation?
They're just not like a scheduled drug, right? It's not like my knowledge of this is a little different, but I think that they should.
But they're treating it like it's an antibiotic.
Yeah, like an antibiotic or
not like it has a serious effect on your expression identity.
Right. There's no warning light about people becoming highly dependent on antidepressants, so we can just prescribe them indefinitely for all of time, right? Whereas like you can't get Oxycontin prescribed for all of time anymore because it's a more tightly regulated drug because of the risks. So
you've explained very eloquently why this is happening, but I'm curious about why the resistance to accepting what we're talking about.
From doctors or from patients?
From doctors. I think most psychiatrists are professional gaslighters. Yeah. That's their job, literally. Most, I'm sure the ones that are respected or ones that we used to go to, if we told them what we experience now, they'd find a way to make us feel like we weren't telling the truth. Yeah. So what do you think is causing that resistance in the collective psyche of the psychiatrists of America?
I think there's two things. The first thing is that most antidepressant prescriptions are actually coming from general practitioners. So it's just such a common thing that they're just giving them out.
What's a general practitioner? Like any doctor?
A general practitioner is someone like, I've got a cold or my knee hurts, or they're often the person who refers you to a specialist.
Oh, okay.
So it's just they'll run basic stuff, and then if something weird comes up, they'll say, okay, go see the endocrinologist or whatever it is. And then, gynecologists prescribe antidepressants all the time. I mean, there's just...
What?
Yeah, postpartum. So, they're actually prescribed for gut health stuff. So internal medicine or GI doctors will prescribe it, which is baffling to me because they also cause those problems. But anyway, so my point is just that it's actually most prescriptions for antidepressants are not coming from psychiatrists. But to go back...
I didn't even know that.
Yes. To go back and answer your question about psychiatry specifically, I think the really tricky part about it is just that unlike most other specialties, there are no blood tests, there are no scans, there's no genetic tests, there's no biomarkers at all for any sort of mental distress or mental illness. And so when a psychiatrist is trying to say, okay, well, you're depressed or you're bipolar, they're literally taking a collection of general symptoms from a checklist and applying them to you through their judgment. And that's it. And so I've heard, and I don't know, because this is also, I know some really great psychiatrists out there who really take it from a more holistic approach where they're, the argument that I think should be made is that, okay, everything affects your biological chemistry. Coffee is going to change your chemistry. Sunshine is going to change it. And so the great psychiatrists that I know understand, one, how to de-prescribe. They understand how to take people off of these drugs safely. they also understand that coffee and alcohol in your lifestyle is seriously impacting the way your body's working. And so they come at it from that perspective. Like, we're going to run labs and see if you're got a hormonal issue or you've got some deficiencies or you're overactive somewhere that could be affecting this, in addition to, your psyche. And then
they're not using any objective data.
Yeah, so most psychiatrists aren't using objective data. They're using a checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start threatening that just by saying, well, I've had these experiences, or I feel like these drugs are bad for me, they've just been taught their entire career that this is the right way. And if a doctor's fighting you, I always feel like that's a sign that not only are they not a right fit, but that something in their ego is getting threatened. Because there are plenty of great doctors out there who will say, I don't know very much about this, but I'm going to go research it. Or, what do you know? Let's work together to find a solution. And if that's the response, great. If it's gaslighting, if it's aggression, if it's defensiveness, you've got someone who's not educated and also really not educated on the current topic, and also really needs to check their ego, in my opinion.
So the resistance seems to be just complete belief that their education and the system that's causing them to...
It's the pedestal paradox.
Yeah, they just can't perceive another way of healing because they think it's worked for them and their patients. Another form of this that I've seen become more popular is taking brain scans of people and then using that to prescribe as well. Have you thought about that? What are the pros and cons? What's your take on that? Moving towards a more like brain-centered treatment plan.
I mean, I think what doesn't make any sense to me about this is that organs don't fail very often. Like, how often, if 1 in 4 people are walking around saying, "Oh, my stomach's failed, I'm on a stomach drug," we'd be saying something's going on here, right? And yet we've seemed to accept that the brain has something wrong with it and that it's failing in some way, and therefore we can fix it with these purely biological, or these interventions that don't account for the fact that we have a neck that connects us to the rest of our body, and that it doesn't make sense for this organ to be failing at such great rates, right? So I love research. I'm glad people are researching these things, but I think it's a short-sighted mistake to assume that you can take a snapshot of what's happening in a nanosecond in someone's body, determine that that's the cause of the problem for their whole life, for something that is so individual and so based in emotion, which is not rational and impossible to compare, and to think that this is going to work. I think we need to keep doing the research and keep putting the whole puzzle together, but to make decisions purely on that, I think is, about as much as a mistake as when you take a blood test and you say, "Oh, you've got your thyroid's like low today," and then to have something be on thyroid medication for the rest of their life without ever checking up on it, because these things fluctuate. Yeah. You don't know. You catch it you catch things, right? And then when we also look at just history, and I really wish doctors were more educated on the history, I really wish psychiatrists were more educated on the history of psychiatric drugs, because when you look at all the research that's happened for the past 50 years, it's just highly contradictory. You have one study that says that, people with depression have low serotonin levels in their spinal fluid, and the one that was done a year later, there's no difference, right? It's just there's no conclusions here.
Yep.
It's all over the map all the time, which should tell you that maybe we're not nearly as close to figuring this out as the media seems to claim we are.
Mm-hmm. Let's end with a closing message from you to your younger self, who was, anyone in that same vicinity or space that perceives that something's wrong with them. Their brain's faulting, they're depressed, and talk to that person right now, which is a lot of people probably listening or in this world. What should that person be doing instead of running to a psychiatrist's office?
Well, in 2024, I think that person needs to get off TikTok. Let's start with that. Like, that wasn't the world I was in when I was 15, but now there's just so many influences that can make you think you're sick in a way you're not because you feel lonely. And I mean, that's kind of what happened to me on a different level. Is I was the only kid I knew who had lost a parent. I felt like an island. And then someone came along and said, well, there's nothing, it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. Here's something that'll make it better. What person wouldn't want to take that route? So 15-year-old me was just trying to be a good kid and do what the adults told me. So I don't think I ever would have had the gall to say, no, this doesn't feel right, because I didn't have the maturity to know what felt right to me. My intuition wasn't honed yet. But I really wish that I had been given more time, and that the adults in my life and the prescribers had looked at the situation and said, we need to give this just like a year or 2 years. I mean, I was not going to go in some horrible direction if I wasn't medicated within 6 months after my dad suddenly dying. And so I just wish that I had been given more time. I wish that there was maybe a little bit more conversation on what grief looks like and feels like. And I was stoic. I didn't have a huge emotional response because I was in shock, and that was deemed as wrong, that I should be crying or something. But now I know that's not quite right. So I just wish there had been a little more time and grace. And I think, at least for 15-year-olds, for young people, I don't know how you get this through a 15-year-old's head, but you're not going to be defined by any one decision you make at 15 for the most part. So there are very few decisions that could change your life at that age. And so just give yourself time and it'll be okay.
Very true. Thank you very much for just being brave enough to share your story, because it's one of those topics where there's just so much projected shame towards people who speak about this. You're up against, powerful pharmaceutical industry, as well as people who are so comfortable in delusion and comfortable in their own way of what they perceive to be healing, but it's not really. So thank you very much. And if you can also just say where to get your book, the name of your book, and where people want, if they're curious about your story more.
Yeah, so my book is called May Cause Side Effects, and it's available wherever books are sold. And you can find me all over the internet at Brooke Siem. So that's BROOKESIEM. And yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to watch more content, please click this video right here, and don't forget to subscribe right here. Thank you.